Guys, how you going? Hope you're all doing very well. This afternoon I'm going to be doing yet another movie review. This movie is a horror film from Australia, English language, released in the year 2020, directed by Andrew Traucki, and this film is called Blackwater Abyss. So Blackwater Abyss is set in northern Australia. You've got a group of friends who are going caving. They abseil down the entrance of the cave. They get to the bottom. They realise that there's a beautiful lagoon, which is really a sight to behold, but unfortunately a storm hits that causes them stranded inside the cave because it's collapsed. So the water levels are rising, so the situation is critical, but if they believe that their problems are going to stop there, they have another thing coming because, to their horror, the lagoon is home to a man-eating crocodile that is hell-bent on making them next on the menu. So whether or not these friends can leave this cave alive is something you're going to have to find out for yourself, because that's as far as I'm going with my synopsis. Now my thoughts on Blackwater Abyss. I didn't really have any expectations coming into this movie, but the reason why I really wanted to watch this film was the simple fact that Andrew Traucki, he does a lot of things very well, but unfortunately there are other elements to his movies that become a little bit of a letdown. Now the first Blackwater film I thought was great, but I thought there were moments in that movie that could have been improved, and so that was the hope coming into Blackwater Abyss. Now this is a second film of Blackwater, but it's not a continuation, so basically the only similarities is the title and ultimately the fact that there's a crocodile. But what Andrew Traucki does very well, he plays on the primal fear that we have of not knowing what's below us, or not knowing where the threat is coming, and ultimately the settings in this movie is a river or it's the ocean, which with his film The Reef, which is about a great white shark. And so we always have that fear of crocodiles and sharks, absolutely magnificent creatures, but creatures that can just play with us if they wanted to, is that we're kind of defenseless against them, and that makes them so scary. And not since Jaws have we been feeling safe going into the waters. And so I just think as though these movies just have a different effect on me, and Andrew Traucki understands this, and he basically turns the dial to an extreme level. And there's moments in his movies that are absolutely unbearable, and that's what I really like about this director, and that's what I was hoping I would get in Blackwater Abyss. But being a sequel, I was kind of umming and ahhing, because a lot of these sequels are cash grabs. Now Blackwater was actually quite popular, a lot of people liked that film, so was this a movie that was going to be just a cash grab on the name, or was this a movie that was going to use the mistakes the first one did and actually make it a better film? So there was a lot of skepticism coming into it, but I was hoping that I'd get something out of it. And while I did get something out of this film, ultimately it was a letdown, because I do believe that this movie, the sole purpose of this movie was to have basically capitalise on the first film, is because this doesn't show enough of its own. It's very generic in what it does. The techniques are very impressive, but ultimately these techniques have been done before, and I felt as though this movie was quite repetitive, which is something I'll go into a little bit later. But what I liked about this film was a way that Andrew Traucki once again uses these horror set pieces. These are set pieces that are very, very unnerving. I thought he used the environment as a character of its own. It's very claustrophobic. It's basically sucking all the life out of you, all the air out of you. You have to have a deep breath after watching this film, because he really has you on a nice edge, and the director is really playing with the viewer. So it's just really, really tense, and there were moments that just had me on the edge of my seat, and is playing on that primal fear of basically not knowing what's underneath the water. And the director uses the crocodile in a way where there's a lot of it that's left into the imagination of the viewer. And that can be so much more scary, because you don't know where the crocodile's coming from. All of a sudden your mind is playing tricks on you, which ultimately creates something that's far more terrifying than the actual crocodile itself. Is that it's the anticipation of the crocodile attacking that's the scariest thing, and that's ultimately what Andrew Traucki does very well in all of his films, and it's no different in Blackwater Abyss. There were some moments that were truly terrifying, and it's, as I said, it's capitalising on that primal fear that we as humans have of what's living in the waters beneath us. And so if you like that kind of thing, Blackwater Abyss demonstrates some really, really competent set pieces of horror, but it's psychological torment that this director is doing. He's basically playing with your emotions, and he seems to be reveling in it. And that's what I think Andrew Traucki does best, and that's definitely the best aspect of Blackwater Abyss. On top of that, you've got some pretty good cinematography. You've got very subtle sort of usage of sound, whether it's the splash of the water, whether it's just the sound of bubbles in the water, just very seemingly innocent things, but in the context of the overall story, it's really terrifying. And so you've got really good sound effects, good moments of suspense, basically not knowing where this attack was coming from. So for a lot of this movie, I was actually out of breath, and that's something that I go into an Andrew Cherokee film expecting. I thought the characters were fairly decent. Surprisingly, they were actually quite likeable for 3/4 of the movie, and I thought as though the acting was adequate. And ultimately, this is a movie where the Crocodile's the main character, but these characters, because you don't hate them, because they're not overly, they're not really irritating, you don't want to see them die. So ultimately, the fear level is elongated to a point where I thought as though, as I said, the psychological tension, it really does play effect, is because these are characters that you don't necessarily want to see die, but unfortunately, not enough to really love them, feel the pain when they're gone. And so it's not as though you feel as though you've lost a friend or a family member, you just feel as though, okay, I've still lost a movie character, but it is a character that nonetheless I didn't really hate, and so that was good. So the runtime of the film, it's not an overly long movie, and so that really should have made the film really good, but unfortunately, although the psychological aspects are really well done, you're going to get a lot more from this movie if you haven't watched other Andrew Cherokee films, is because this is a film that shows very competent techniques, but they're techniques that have been used in his other movies. So therefore, it does create a sense of predictability in that, if you've seen The Reef, especially with the great white shark, there were moments in that movie that were very reminiscent of moments in Blackwater Abyss. And there's also moments of the first Blackwater that were evident in this movie. And so I thought to myself, you're very good at certain things and how to actually create a scene, but unfortunately in this movie, I felt as though he's run out of ideas, he's run out of creative ways to give you that sense of, sheer terror, the hairs on the back of your neck standing up. And so there were moments that took me off guard, but there were other moments that I thought were really well done, but ultimately, because they were used before, I kind of knew how it was going to transpire. So I knew the end result, but there were moments where I thought getting up to that end result was actually quite well done, because it does have you on the knife's edge and it really is playing with you. And so that was a letdown. I also thought there were moments that were very repetitive. And so I thought there was a sense of deja vu in quite a few instances. And so I thought, it's definitely filler. Is that, again, he's running out of creative ideas. And this is what happens when you use a movie as a cash grab from the first film. In that, it's not really snowballing this movie and evolving the film to anything different. It's basically just recycling something. Therefore, the recycled nature does become quite repetitive to a point where I felt as though, this is a cash grab and there's no real justification for this movie existing other than that. There's another problem that I also had of a side element 3/4 of the way into the movie. Now, this side element creates a sense of tension between these friends that was completely unnecessary. It was completely unnecessary because you have a level of animosity between some of the characters, and you didn't need that, because this movie didn't need to be about these humans. The movie was about these crocodiles, and you had likeable characters leading up into that final quarter, but for some stupid reason there was this little twist as far as these characters are concerned that just went completely nowhere. And I just thought as though it was shoved in there just to be out of left field for the sake of being out of left field. But the biggest criticism I have of Blackwater Abyss was the absolutely ridiculous Hollywood-esque ending. Now, I don't know why it needed to have this ending. I don't know what Andrew Cherokee was thinking, but it just completely destroyed what the film had going for it. It was a lot of fun, but then unfortunately towards the end it decides to go down a Hollywood route, and it just completely, it just become really quite laughable. And it didn't need to be laughable. It could have gone down a completely different route and it would have been a hell of a lot better. But unfortunately, Andrew Cherokee decided, we'll go for this ending and just have you rolling your eyes. And basically, if you see the film, you'll know what I mean when I say it is definitely Hollywood. So there's a certain level of lack of self-awareness, especially in the last quarter of this movie. And unfortunately, a lot of films fall flat in the last quarter. But definitely, this was the most disappointing aspect of this movie, is because these set pieces have been done before. If you go into this movie as your first Andrew Cherokee film, you're going to get so much more out of it. But the last quarter of this movie really lets it down to a really disappointing level. And that is the reason why I come away from Blackwater Abyss bitterly disappointed. Not because it was a terrible film, but it should have been a great film. But it just didn't have the awareness to really capitalise on all the good things it had going for it. Therefore, it comes across as a very generic and disposable horror film. But it's not the worst movie you'll ever see, but unfortunately far from good. So overall, for Blackwater Abyss, going to give this one 2 stars. A lot of the work was let down from the lack of self-awareness. Alright guys, that's it for my review. Hope you enjoyed it. Till next time, keep watching movies and I'll see you later.